Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen, on a very unique episode about a very unique thing that is called a documentary. Now, before you watch this video, you could do yourself a favor in going over to the Shawn Ryan channel on YouTube and watch an episode where he interviews a PSYOP expert named Chase Hughes. Chase Hughes was a guy that was involved, I believe, in PSYOP operations for over 20 years. He has a company where he took those tools of manipulating the mind, and he has various businesses, hopefully for good. But this guy lays it out for you for 2.5 hours in this episode. And I will tell you, regardless of how you think you built up your defenses, you're awake and all this other good language about how we defend ourselves against this stuff. In the last 30 minutes, he'll show you that you're not free and clear whatsoever. That they're doing things to your brain that you just are unaware of. And he teaches you exactly how he does it and exactly how they do it. And he has all this history about how it all built up over time, how those tools came to fruition. He bites his lip on a few things, but just watch Deep Thoughts for the rest of it. But if you are an OG Deep Thoughts listener, you're going to find out that I've been telling you pretty much the same stuff for the last 10 years. And it's not a contest. It's just to get you the information so you can defend yourself. So I'm minding my own business, and friends came up to me and said, "Hey, did you see the interview that Joe Rogan did with this guy named Dan Farah?" It's Farah. I'm like, no. Haven't seen it come up on the old Telegram, pipelines. So I look it up. It's a new, we're going to call it what they call it, documentary that is going to cover this disclosure of UAPs. The very ridiculous name for what we usually call UFOs. Why they felt like they had to redo that acronym is a little suspect to me. It almost sounds like a legal liability thing. UAPs are what the U.S. military makes, and UFOs are what come from another dimension or planet, right? But this story starts out on Joe Rogan. Of course, Joe Rogan's just eating that stuff up like a little kid. He's making so much money that at this point you can be convinced to sort of smooth out your moral compass for smelling BS and calling it out on your show. He's turned into a George Norrie from a Art Bell. Right? Art Bell kept it clean. Art Bell got into trouble because he kept it real. You start talking BS on Art Bell, he would lean into you a little bit. George Norrie's like, yeah, sure, man, whatever, right? And that's what Joe's turned into, in my opinion. I think he's a very intelligent guy and a very talented guy, but a movie without any conflict is not a movie. It's just some exhibition show, and that's what they kind of turn into at this point. You can go on a show and say anything, and it's just like right in your brain like it's real, But Farah paints this picture of making this documentary in his living room, and he was doing it for like 3 years, and he was going to get a divorce with his wife, and it's this real indie film narrative that's attached to it right from the very beginning. This thing is anything but some indie production. We're gonna go through it, trust me. It's supposed to be 34 experts that went on camera and talked about UAPs. I think a few of them, which I'm going to name, are very legitimate folks. And I'm not trying to criticize the individuals themselves. Some of them have served their country well. I respect that 1,000%. And you never know who's leaning on who to make them say what they are saying, right? So you just can't judge. Like, you can't blame the astronauts for not going to the moon. It's just when you're looking down the end of a barrel, you might do a few things that you didn't think about before, right? But there was a little video on YouTube called I Pet Goat. I Pet Goat 2, I should say. Many of you saw it. I did a whole review on it. There are multi-hour reviews on this little 15-minute, 17-minute or whatever prophetic little cartoon, this animated cartoon, CG, computer-generated cartoon. It was a very similar narrative that I think that they love to cut and paste, right? This thing was predicting things like Notre Dame going down before it went down. It's disturbing. I've shown it to grown men, and they looked at me and said, "Why'd you show me that? Don't show me stuff like that. It's an animated cartoon without any real gore in it or anything like that." But they knew they were looking at prophetic messages of both the past, present, and future, and they didn't want to know. So that indie narrative gets kind of spun up by Dan himself. But when you see this thing, and if you watch that Chase Hughes video before you really watch this documentary, you're going to see everything that this guy was warning you about. The utter manipulation of the mind. But there's a genius new formula that this thing is following, which I haven't personally seen any other so-called documentary. Let's just spend a minute talking about documentaries, the legitimate ones that you've seen in your lifetime hundreds of times. What are they? Well, they're pretty raw, aren't they? They're raw. The people that get interviewed aren't polished. They don't have beautiful sets and lighting. They don't have all their words prepared for them. They're asked questions and they give genuine answers, and they flub their answers sometimes, but it's raw, and it really provides pound for pound incredibly unique information each time they're spoken to in the documentary. Well, there's a new formula. To understand the new formula, we have to reflect back on how we ingest videos today on the internet. Well, there's YouTube, right? Where you get more longer format, I think much more educational experiences, much richer experiences. And then there's things like TikTok and Instagram. And now Facebook's copying those other two. Little tiny shorts is what they call them. Of course, YouTube's got them now too. That's causing a bit of a problem for the human psyche, isn't it? Short attention span people that can't listen to you finish a sentence before they're back in their telephone looking for a red dot on an application. It's rotting the minds of everyone on earth. But the people who made this video, and I would say people plural, because I don't think it's Dan all by himself, and I'm not including just because there's other people that are cut into the film. I'll talk about those people. There's something big going on with this. There's an agenda in this thing. I almost want to call it a mockumentary. And we're going to go through the narratives. But this thing was cut together like a bunch of TikTok videos. Each cut of this video comes in with a super polished, super strong message that's repeated and repeated and repeated over and over and over again. What's brainwashing? Repetition. When you see this thing, and I'm going to key you into the words, I can make a drinking game and you would be blasted in 10 minutes. You would run out of alcohol in 15 minutes. If I said you got to drink every time this statement is made, and you're being brainwashed. It's on Amazon for $25 if you buy it, $19.99 if you rent it. I mean, give me a break, right? So, guys making money, whatever, right? If you buy it, you buy it. I bought it because why not pay the extra $4 so I can have it? Now, before I get into the people that are in this, I just want to say many of these folks have served their country well. I respect them 100%. You never know why anyone's in it, like I said, right? Astronauts, you never know why they did what they did, but most of them are staring down the barrel of a gun. Don't quite think it's gone to that extreme, and I think these individuals are willingly participating. But there's several people in this. Some are just clips from previous, recordings, right? Like Reagan in his 1987 speech about what if the world was invaded by aliens, we'd all come together under what? One world government? Mm-hmm. And I think that what's going on right now is that there's a multi-stage approach to that. I think that's still the goal. But if you're going to do this, or trying to do it in a really weird way, which I have alluded to and talked about very specifically on this show when it comes to that whole conspiracy of someone or something, some group, faking some alien invasion with technology that has been held behind the curtain that when debuted, you can't even conceive of what you're looking at unless you watch Deep Thoughts Radio. What's beautiful about it is all the propulsion conversations I've had with you guys about how these things fly is beautifully represented about 2/3 through the documentary. They've got some perfect, CG renderings of exactly what I've been telling you about the gravity well technology. And I'm not the only one, right? But there is one guy in this mockumentary. I'm just going to call it that. His name's Luis Elizondo. He's about 85% of the entire documentary. This dude is polished. This dude does presentations all over the country, maybe the world. He comes in like Miley Cyrus on a wrecking ball, okay? Every single time the camera cuts to this guy, if you know anything about writing for television or especially this kind of I don't even know what you call it, this sort of kind of narrative piece where they really want to inject something in your brain. The first sentence that you say is the way they used to teach you how to write paragraphs. You write the main, action and subject in the first sentence, and then you basically elaborate on it below. Once you change a different subject, that's when you need to create another paragraph. Television works the same way on these kind of productions. Guy blasts out a statement and then elaborates on it. Blasts out a statement, and there's a cadence to his voice. There's a cadence to the music. The music alone is one of the dead giveaways of this thing. It's not some average indie guy in his living room making the music for this thing. You've got the most crescendo moments over and over and over for the first half of the film. All crescendoing right at the punchline that they want you to remember, which are these narratives we're going to start talking about. Now, apparently, Elizondo was a badass military guy, actually saw combat. He's an OG guy. He's definitely served his country well. I'm not sure, why the whole thing had to focus on him, but if you had to put a little bit of poison on the tip of a spear, this guy's got the talent to deliver it right in your gut, both metaphorically and physically. There's no way that watching this video is going to ruin the experience for you if you're really into it and you're like, don't tell me what happens in the movie. It really won't. It'll actually help you understand what you're looking at, and it will cut out sort of the mind control beaming at you that they inserted in this thing so you can actually hear anything in between the lines and get more out of it, in my opinion. I have a whole nother episode about rewriting history that it's taken me forever to edit, and I've been really busy. And I saw this mockumentary, and I said, man, I got to set the record straight on this thing. So again, the outside narrative of this entire production is that it's just this lone wolf out there creating this thing all by himself. And man, he almost lost his marriage to it, and he took 1,000,000 years to make it. And then you see it, and you're like, oh, right, sure. Yeah, and I Pick Goat financed it for a few $1,000s, sure. But Elizondo, Luis, I think I'm saying his name correct, Luis, and a guy named Jay Stratton were two guys that said that, here's what they did. They said, oh, we started hearing all this information about UAPs, right? It's been relabeled. And they're like, man, we're hearing about reports of seeing these things. And like it's new, right? Just because you rename a UFO to a UAP, suddenly it's new information to your brain, right? It's not. It's been going all the way back to 1947. And by the way, nothing about this thing, this production, negates the fact that these things are probably real. Okay, it gets to some folks that I think I'm going to credit here for. I think they're the most legitimate folks that talk about actually looking at material, participating in reverse engineering, potentially witnessing at least photographs of the actual non-humans. But these two guys get together, and according to their narrative, they're like, man, no one was paying attention to this stuff. So they created their own group called ATIP. And it stands for Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. So ATIP itself is basically saying we're going to categorize all these things into a threat table. All right, well, just talk about how, that might seed your day. Okay, well, what are we doing here? We're going to figure out how threatening they are. It'd be like going to a grade school and saying, yeah, we got an ATIP program here at this grade school. Well, what for? We're going to find out how all these kids are threats to us. Well, they don't look like threats to me. Have they done anything bad to you? No, but we're going to check out their threat levels. Have any UFOs of any kind created a crash, caused any problems, a big disaster, any of that kind of stuff? Nope. Not even in the rumored stuff have they caused any issues. The only issue that has ever been rumored to happen is that if you get too close to them, because of their electromagnetic field, supposedly the electromagnetic field is so sloppily created on the outside of the vehicle that people get irradiated by it and they have issues. Now, we know that there have been sightings in the early 60s where these flying vehicles were escorted by military helicopters. Odd how they could keep up with the UFO. And that thing, those various vehicles escorted by U.S. Air Force, basically, they did create problems for people down below. Again, how would you like to create a problem that's a liability to the citizens of your country because you're spilling out some sloppily made, hastily made invention that's actually hurting people down below if they happen to get too close to it, or if you lose altitude and you're just cruising over neighborhoods and you're causing leukemia in everybody, and then you can just blame it on aliens, and there's no way they can charge you, right? You can always just deny it anyway, which is what they always do. But even if you got caught, you just, that was an alien, you know? But threat. That is about 80% of the narrative of the reinforcement formula in this mockumentary. It's all about national security. If you like old sci-fi, then you will know all the way back to, my gosh, the day the Earth stood still, all the way up to, say, To Serve Man, the episode in Twilight Zone, and tons of other films. It's always the military. We got to nuke them. We got to nuke them. They're always a threat. They're always a threat. They're always a threat, right? That's always what they do. It's an old Hollywood narrative, and that is 80% of this documentary. 80% of it's all about national security. How do they define that? Well, we can't control these vehicles. We don't know if they're a harm or a benefit or a threat. We just don't know. But, again, it's like the grade school analogy. Have they ever hurt you before? Well, they scared us. Why? Because you don't have the mental constitution to conceive of a vehicle from someplace else in the universe. And so when you see one, you get scared. And you have all this top clearance and you can handle the truth, like Jack Nicholson said. But we can't. Isn't that funny? Right? I find it interesting that one of the themes of a lot of the folks that you listen to, you've got these sort of, sociopathic scientists who barely have more than any friends outside their circle, and they can totally handle what's going on. Why? Because they're an atheist or something, right? And no one else can. They do these little calculations. It talks about presidents that have done calculations to figure out whether they should walk to the mic. That's the new thing that Dan Farah is talking about. I kind of like it. He said that George Bush Jr. did a big evaluation on whether or not he was going to walk to the mic and tell everybody about it. But it was too chaotic in the world at the time. Post 9/11, all the wars in the Middle East, can't do it. He said that Trump did it just before he left, and he evaluated it, and he said, it's too much economic. Like, you don't have to pay your bills the next day if aliens exist. Who's going to say, I'm not paying my rent anymore because aliens exist? Nobody. No one's going to say that. But they're using all of these narratives to make you want it, right? Don't stop me, man. I want it. I deserve it. Just be careful what is on the spoon when they shove it in your mouth, okay? Because that's what they're incubating up, in my opinion. So the new formula is not only cut in these little chunks. Everything in that documentary is made to be cut into shorts. They could cut probably 50 shorts out of this thing, plastered all over the web, get a bunch of $25. I mean, again, not against someone making a buck, and it is entertainment, so enjoy it, but just understand it's entertainment. But this ATIP organization comes out. It's supposedly like one of the first formal groups that really looks at UAPs, the new designation of them. Well, we got all kinds of projects in the past, all the way up from the 40s. And then this Elizondo guy says, look, I was digging around, and then finally I found out there was a previous project, and it's called the Legacy Project. Ooh. Isn't it funny that we've got all of these ufologists, all these MUFON people dedicated their entire lives to this, and no one's ever heard of the Legacy Project? It's a new narrative. It's a new story. It's a whole new history. It's being rewritten as you watch this mockumentary. What about Project Blue Book? What about any of the other clandestine projects out there that reviewed this kind of stuff? What about Bill Cooper? Bill Cooper said he was in one of those projects for 20 years. And after it was over, he said, I think, he goes, I know what I saw on the top of a ship as a deck ape doing guard duty. He says, I saw two aircraft or two vehicles go into the water and two come out of the water. Or maybe it's the opposite chronology. Because I saw that with my own eyes, and so did like 5 other guys that were doing duty that night. And within 12 hours, he signed up for a gag order, and he goes into the project where he's now reviewing stuff. And in the, I think, early 90s, he did a interview with CNN, I believe, on his sofa. It's very grainy and weird. It's actually a documentary. And they asked him, they said, well, what do you think after all this stuff? And he said, well, here's the thing. He goes, I think that what I was told potentially was all fake, but what I saw was real. Because I don't know if anything I ever saw in photographs of vehicles or alien non-humans, I should say, was real. Interesting, right? So if you were to take this mockumentary and subtract every single scene that stresses national security and accuses these fairly benign creatures, okay, so far, of ever doing anything negative to mankind, besides turning off nuclear weapons, which I've covered the details, you get way more details in my episode of exactly the forensics evidence and what they actually saw than this thing. They just blow over a bunch of details about how surveillance security doors were actually breached. This vehicle hovers over the front of the base, drawing everyone out as people were firing on this big orange ball in the sky, while in the back, a bunch of beings of some sort went through all the security, got down into the missiles, and messed with the guidance systems so they would deactivate. How does it go from 20 details down to like 2? It's interesting how this stuff morphs because they want it to be more accessible to your brain. They realize when they start going into details that you're going to lose a bunch of the audience. It's getting complicated. I don't understand. They went through the back security gate. I can't even fathom how that works. I'm going to click, Now, if you paid $25 for it, you're probably not going to click away. But they said there's 34 experts in this mockumentary. I'm going to give you some of the names, and I'm not going to say anything about these people, but I'll let you make up your mind where the bias might be in this and generally what you think the credibility of these individuals are who are telling you this is all the way it is. National security, evil alien, right? Adam Schiff, Schumer, Senator Harry Reid, James Clapper, and John Brennan. Any of you follow the last 16 years of politics and those names come up, you're going to subtract anything that's mentioned as experts talking about this content. Okay, so you got to subtract those from your 34 experts. Why you would put half of those people in there blows my mind. And some of these are just clips, right? They didn't get interviewed. It's old clips that they said in the Senate. But they're cast in the film, and they're sort of like Al Gore's list of climate experts, right? Where the top 6 actually sued to get their name off because the other 3,000 were people that received funding to go their way, But the ATIP project and this legacy project pretty much gather up a lot of the sort of probably post-Project Blue Book observations in the more modern era, probably the last 45 years or so. And from that point, we can account for a lot of these tic-tac things. They even said, even though I've never heard this reported, that I believe all the way back to 1989, the Russians captured a tic-tac that was way bigger than the 40-foot one that we supposedly saw off the coast of San Diego. Wow, that's interesting because the Russians have always been very forthcoming about this kind of content. They haven't really held back on this kind of stuff. But in this mockumentary, they talk about the fact that China's captured them, supposedly. Of course, China tells you how much their money's worth, and then they buy everything in your country, right? Pretty legitimate source of information there. And then, of course, the Russians. The Russians have captured things, and that's the only other country I'd really believe it could pull it off, besides perhaps the combined efforts of Europe. But they start off this after they get done with about, 50 blasts of telling you national security threat due to aliens that have never done anything bad to us since we first started seeing them. They talk about the fact that we have been in a top secret Cold War with Russia and eventually China. Okay. And that it's a race to reverse engineer all this technology, which would be the power systems, the propulsion systems, and perhaps some other smaller items that might end up in your circuit boards or what have you. Then they've created a very interesting distinction, which is, I believe, a true fact. They said that Freedom of Information Act requests are to get documents out of the government. So if they created something like MKUltra, well, you could Freedom of Information Act something out. If you knew it existed, that's the big trick, right? You could go ask for that to come out. If you don't know it exists, then how do you write a request form, right? How do you ask for something out of my kitchen if you don't know it exists? You can't, right? However, when you guys heard about Snowden being a contractor, quote unquote, for various agencies, you might, get a little bit of repulsion because you're like, what? How are contractors allowed into some of the most top secret programs that we have? Can anyone get into contracting? Well, the answer is yes, but they do still have to acquire a clearance to get into various projects. But, you never know. You can't Freedom of Information Act something out of a contractor because it's a private entity like Lockheed Martin or something. You can't. It's not a government. It's not a government institution. It's a private corporation. You have no rights. I mean, if you had rights like that, man, without a crime, you can't just go to Google and say, hey, I want a Freedom of Information Act, your algorithm, so I know how to build a website better. That wouldn't work. That's a trade secret, right? So what they have illustrated in this is very, very interesting, and I think it probably has some truth to it. Outside of those sort of shadow entities that aren't really governments, but they might be related to individuals within the government. But what they said was this. They said politicians come and go. A lot of the roles, even the head of some of the big alphabet agencies, they're just appointed when the president arrives. They do 4 to 8 years. Maybe they get reappointed if another like-minded president comes in, but they normally do 4 to 8 years and they leave. And I'm sure it's a very tough job to do in the first place. I don't know if anybody wants to stay any longer than that. So they come and they go, and they get information as needed. Well, if they're not asking questions, they don't get told. And even if they do ask questions, there's a need to know clause in those kind of requests for top secret information. So what they've illustrated pretty well in this show is that it's the contractors, and let's just take it chronologically to give you an example. Let's say a UFO lands, and for some reason it can't take off again or it crashes. We find it, or we capture it, and then we take it to a particular facility, and somehow we can get inside these things. I always find that really interesting. If it doesn't crash and rip the hole open, I don't know how you get inside the thing. But let's just say they start pulling pieces and parts out of it, and they're not quite sure. They think this is pretty much the power generation, not quite sure. Well, let's get everything that's kind of related to power generation, and we'll send it to X corporation. I shouldn't say that because that's Elon Musk now. A corporation. And they're supposed to work on the propulsion. Then they take something else, the metal, and they give it to B corporation. And they're just supposed to work on the metal. Okay, so that happens in, say, 1950. Well, politicians come and they go, and they come and they go. Well, the people at the top, they don't really know what's going on. Maybe if it happens on their watch, they knew about the little transfer of technology to a corporation, but they're not scientists themselves. They can't really participate and provide any benefit. And so they go. And then the contractor stays. The contractor can stay for 30, 40 years, right? Pull a whole term and get a retirement package and everything. Meanwhile, they're working on this technology. Meanwhile, they get the benefits of the technology. So say they figure out something about the power supply, and they're like, okay, we can't put that out because that's 0-point energy, but there's some other efficiency things we discovered that we can add to what we're doing today already. Or the metal, they come up with different alloys and patent it and send it out there, different plastics and patent it and send it out there, right? Well, they're suggesting that particular thing's been going on for a really long time. And it seems logical, although, we haven't seen any major revolutions besides the microchip. And maybe you could say fiber optics, maybe some night vision stuff that could be attributed to giant leaps in conceptual technology, because a lot of it has to do with, we never even thought about doing that, and let's try. And then suddenly we may not be able to copy what some alien piece of technology can do, but we get to the best thing. Supposedly the infrared goggles that the NOD systems that a lot of our soldiers use, was an impersonation of what the lens does in front of a gray's eye. When they supposedly held up the gray's lens, which is in front of their eyeball, they could see at night. And they're like, we don't know how this works. It's all organic. See if you can figure it out. That kicked off, this is the theory anyway, that kicked off someone saying, well, let's just look for infrared light and heat signatures, and then we'll start seeing various things, right? Apparently, one of the big challenges for our more special operations guys that go out in the middle of the night is that if it's not a full moon, if there's no moon in the sky, that a lot of their systems from, say, 2005 to 2015, you really couldn't see anything, so they weren't much of a help. I think that's changed now. Something interesting to think about, though. So they do have some quote-unquote scientists in this mockumentary, and they're the most trustworthy ones that I think we can listen to and overall take their opinions at face value. There is one exception with one of the guys. One of the gentlemen's name is Harold Puthoff. I think Puthoff. He's an electrical engineer. He's a parapsychologist known for his work in laser physics and remote viewing, so keep that in mind. And he has supposedly a deck of theories that's all about zero-point energy systems. So I like it. I think he was born in 1936, so he's a pretty old guy, and he looks pretty darn good in this show. Another guy is Eric Davis. He's a PhD astrophysicist. He works as a researcher in the Institute of Advanced Studies in Austin. And the other kind of scientist guy is a guy named Gary Nolan, and he works at Stanford University, and they approach him because they wanted him to kind of study the injuries that individuals had sustained by being close to these vehicles. Now, the interesting thing about these three gentlemen is that every time they're on camera, it feels like a documentary. It's not polished. They have their own stories, and they seem to be very quick to the point and very consistent in what they say. So it's good. I mean, two of the first two guys I mentioned, they actually seem to have worked together. It's kind of how they put off their vibe. And they're just like, look, it's 100% we have non-human vehicles, and we have seen at least two species of non-human beings. Now, again, with all things that you would have to present in a court of law, there's always the question, did you see this with your own eyes, or did you just get it hearsay? Now, of course, seeing things with your own eyes in terms of actual engagement events, that's only for the folks that were on duty that time, assigned, attached to that unit, and they were at the region. They're the only ones that have a hope of actually being those individuals. The interesting thing is that we have tons of people that say they were at various events. Now, sadly, a lot of people have passed, and I think that it's interesting that there was very little, if any, in individuals that said, I was there when this occurred. There are a few, and it's actually, it's nice to hear their stories. And what's interesting about it, having studied this for years, and especially for this show, for 10 years going into every single claim that's out there so I can make episodes, I heard configurations of vehicles I had never heard before. One vehicle was perfect black box, a Saturn box inside of a sphere, where the edges of the box, which are eight little vertices or vertices that would touch the edge of the sphere, were seemingly getting, maybe powered by this or emitting the field itself. What they want to insinuate is that the sphere around it is actually the sort of, if you've ever seen the movie Explorers with the little kids in River Phoenix, it's the sphere that the kids created around their amusement park car to travel to the spaceship in the movie. It's interesting that's coming back as reality, right? Kind of funny. Another one was the orange orbs. I mean, I have friends that saw the orange orb. My buddy's Charlie, who passed away sadly early. He told me, one of our last encounters, he said, look, I was sitting on my back porch out in the suburbs of Kansas, and he goes, I saw this green orb come over my house, and it was so bright. He goes, look, I could have read a newspaper just looking down at my hands. And then he goes, he sees two fighter jets chasing the thing. He said they went way off the coast very quickly. Obviously, they're not breaking the sound barrier, but he said the orb came back over his house without the pursuit vehicles. And this guy has no reason to lie to me whatsoever. And he didn't elaborate beyond that. You know, a guy who's telling kind of a tall tale will typically go with the sort of the Frisbee Twilight Zone character where it's just on and on to the break of dawn, you know, and you're like, he didn't. He just kept it. That's the only experience I've ever had. And then what's interesting about it is there's a bunch of views of the orange orb in Texas. You go all the way back to the early 80s, like I've said 100 times in different shows, and they have flown over farm communities where one farmer thought his crops were on fire. When he looked up at night at his ceiling, he says, oh my God, there was like fire color in my house, really bright. And he goes, I thought the crops were on fire because I heard a bunch of people yelling outside. And he goes, look out the window, and it's this orange orb that's just got the whole place lit up. But the thing that they said in this mockumentary that was different was that it was gigantic. It was the diameter of a football field. I was thinking, well, maybe my buddy Charlie, you saw it when it was much further up, and so a football field looks like a basketball, you know. If you don't know, the intro is based on the film, the Stanley Kubrick film, 2001: A Space Odyssey. I think most of you know that. But you know, at the end of the intro, I bring in all the monoliths, and every monolith is an episode, which is why the icon's a monolith, right? They actually talked about a gigantic flat black rectangle hovering over an airbase, I think, over some base, and it's just sitting there silent until it went floop up into the air and just basically, I think they said it flew off the horizon, and it's going super duper fast. They spend a fairly good chunk of time in this mockumentary that is debating the very physics of the flying of these vehicles, how they could possibly fly, and how it's impossible, and how anything inside would be dead, and, you know, that you just simply can't move through the atmosphere that quickly. And they did acknowledge the ones that are apparently going several hundred miles in the ocean, which does lend itself to the fact there is resistance down there, even with their algorithm. They're not able to hit, 40,000 miles an hour. They said, these things have been tracked a little over 40,000 miles an hour and like 10 times faster than that. It's like, well, why don't you say 400,000 miles an hour, And I think the reason why is they simply didn't know how fast those things were going. But then they break about 2/3 in, and they start talking about the actual propulsion systems, the gravity well technology that I've been harping about on this show. And Bob Lazar has eventually evolved his story over the years to include this gravity well system. Remember, if you watch all Bob Lazar's appearances from, I think, 89 or 90, all the way up to modern day, he retells the story of walking into S4 and he embellishes it at a level that's like, come on, dude. It wasn't until I think late 2000 or late 1990s or early 2000s he said that when he walked into S4, in his earlier interview, he just saw what we call the sports model, which is what I modeled in season 5. That's all he saw. That's all he saw. But he got tired of telling his story. So 10 years later, he adds something you would never forget and something you would never skip in your recollection of walking into S4, which is that there was 8 other vehicles, total 9. The sports model didn't have any damage on it whatsoever. And the other 9 had some form of impact. They were all different shapes, like different models. Kind of find it hard to believe that it's like, what are these aliens like? Here's the 2004 model. It's shaped like a boot. Now here's the other one. It's shaped like a sphere. It's almost like Close Encounters, the fictional movie from 1978, where none of their ships ever look the same, Okay, maybe they're fashion conscious. I don't know. But the Netflix special, which is made by another guy, I question highly. Again, he's all fluff, all, kind of sort of a me show as opposed to an actually documentary, right? Now, the one thing I will give Dan Farah credit for is he's not in his documentary. He's not in this show at all. I don't think you ever hear his voice other than a little narrative over. But when Bob Lazar shows up in Netflix, he starts talking about how, the gravity well and this element, this specialized crystal that basically emits electromagnetic field, and that because of the way it's hand constructed and cut up and diced and lathed, that you can attach it to something and it creates an augmentation of that into the antimatter engines down below. And they think it's antimatter because apparently they did get one of these engines open, which killed 2 guys that were doing it. But it was open after that, and Bob Lazar got hired to fill one of their spots. That's his new story. And that's how they were able to look inside. They were looking how energy was routed, and they said that looks like an antimatter configuration, right? So just to review, the first thing they talk about is the Cold War that we have had with Russia and now China to reverse engineer this stuff. We don't even know what Russia or China has, other than Russia said they captured one of the Tic Tacs. We've had several, especially before the fall of Russia is really when they talked about this whole thing. So when that fall happened, a bunch of top secret stuff came out. We've got generals coming out saying, yeah, you know, UFOs are real, but that's about all we know. Instead of, oh yeah, we got a big giant, I don't know how big this thing would be, but 80 feet, 100 feet, Tic Tac thing. And they said in this mockumentary, they said the Russians claimed to have found 4 non-human life forms inside. Now, whether or not they're dead or alive, who knows? If you listen to every single kind of MUFON interview that's gone on and some of the Project Disclosure stuff by Dr. Stephen Greer, there's plenty of discussion about aliens that we have that are alive, that we have an exchange program with them. Nothing else. We've got some alive that sit in our facilities, and they call them parrots because they just repeat what we say, and it takes about 8 hours to get one concept to go back and forth. But supposedly they can read your mind with different interviews. So the second narrative that blasts through the entire mockumentary is national security, national threat, da-da-da-da-da. Now, where does that head in the end? If you can convince a populace that this is a threat, even though you have a characterization of life out there that has never done anything wrong to you, where does that lead? That leads to laws. That leads to loss of freedom. That leads to more tyranny. So I think that's probably the precursor to the ultimate 1987 speech by Reagan, which is to get us underneath one thumb. Just my opinion. But another one popped up where this Elizondo guy said he was walking around the Senate after, I think, doing maybe a hearing, discussing things with individuals. I don't know if he did a public hearing or it was just some backdoor hearing, briefing or what have you. He said that he had senators who are religious fanatics walking up to him saying, you're doing the devil's work. All of these aliens are demons, which again is a narrative that popped out about 2015. I mean, it really gained a lot of steam. I've been here for a long time. And so, of course, that then folds right into ATIP, a threat assessment, right? And that falls into the national security, and that falls into pass some laws to make sure that, man, I guess you can't do anything, right? Because you might be an alien, right? You can't do that. Can't wear red on Thursday because, man, they love red. And that might signal that you want them to take over the world at that point in time. Just wait for that lunacy to happen, right? You've already seen idiocracy come real in your lifetime, right? So what's the end of that? Well, religion is bad. And what do they always say about telling the world about aliens, right? Well, it might have a huge religious impact. They claimed in this mockumentary that, and I think most of us believe this, if there is indeed proof that aliens exist, well, the Vatican and that whole superstructure down there knows that if they come out the next day and say aliens are real, then who is Jesus Christ? Who is all the other gods in the world that we've ever worshipped? It will throw a monkey wrench into the situation. And it's the narrative that they're trying to put forth, and they've been doing this one for probably 50 years. As soon as you find out that aliens are real, then suddenly your moral fabric just vanishes. You can do horrible things to people. You're going to do horrible things to people because none of it's real. And one equates to the other, which isn't true, right? The idea that God doesn't exist simply because other beings were made is, I don't think a lot of people believe that, right? There are some people hanging on to that thread in a sweater. I'm the only thing God ever made. But I mean, those people are dying out with the baby boomers, I'm telling you. How is it, I've asked this question several times, but how is it that we have been inundated since 1938 when Orson Welles read H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds as if it was real in New York City, mainly broadcast into North New Jersey, where he said the aliens were landing, where everybody panicked for an hour. all the way up through The Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet, all these other movies, hundreds, if not thousands of alien movies, and we all survived, right? We all survived, and suddenly they believe the same exact people that can watch that content in metric tons of time are going to suddenly panic because it's real. Give me a break. So, one of the interesting things that's going through, and you got to kind of look at this with suspicious eyes. But one of them has to do with the UAP Disclosure Act. And this is something that, again, Dr. Stephen Greer apparently did in 2001 on video. You can go watch it. And, at least 20 guys went up to a podium and said, my name is this, I saw this, I'm willing to testify, under oath that this happened. And then he does something like 200 interviews with people. Some are suspect, but some are really good. I mean, you only have to have 2 or 3 that are excellent. And I've talked about them on the show as well. If you like the subject, go to deepthoughtsradio.com and just look up, alien conversation and alien category, and you'll have all these videos for you. But the UAP Disclosure Act is to penetrate the veil of the NDA. What they want is full immunity to tell the truth. So if you saw something, you can finally say something. One of the things that this Chase Hughes said was that there's a lot of fake whistleblowers. They claim that a person's a whistleblower, and when they start speaking, they're reading from a piece of paper, which has been written for them. That's not their opinion. That's a narrative being injected from this event. They created interest to make you watch the video to program your brain. You got to watch that video at the Shawn Ryan Show. All the videos at Shawn Ryan's shows are just phenomenal. But if you're going to pass an act, you know how they put pork stuff in there, right? They put other things in there. Okay, well, everything's free, except everything's going to cost a lot of money. It's always sort of like they use the words to name the act or the law, and it's the opposite of, they'll say like it's the Affordable Care Act, and it's not affordable. Well, as soon as you sign up for it, the premiums quadruple, wait 2 years, quadruple again, and you're upside down, you can't afford anything. But they'll call it the Affordable Act, right? So at face value, it sounds great. And if they could pass a UAP Disclosure Act for all the folks all the way back to the beginning of probably 1947's encounter, then that'd be fantastic. Now, what's interesting about this mockumentary is they do mention the Roswell crash, and they actually claim that 4 individuals were discovered at the crash site. They also talked about it not being a saucer shape, which all the people who actually were there and saw it said it was definitely saucer shaped and about 30 feet across. Suddenly it's a new shape. It's like this horseshoe shaped thing or something. Now, the people that were there, the family discovered it first, and the archaeologist that came with his kids, you can go look these people up. One kid was there, and he still tells the story because he was 8 years old when he saw it. There was one still alive, one dying, and one very charred. So if there's another dude inside the vehicle, then he's still in the vehicle at the time, and the guy just didn't fish him out. I could believe that, right? But they don't talk about the Maury Island or the Puget Sound thing that happened a few weeks earlier, where 3 or 4 craft come over the Maury Island. They've got these disc-shaped, like donut-shaped UFOs, and one of them is dropping out this sort of electrolysis steel or something, right? This stuff was witnessed by a ton of people in the bay. It's a daytime viewing. This stuff was falling out so much that it killed a dog, broke a little kid's arm, and the father had to take his son to get the arm fixed, came back, he took a bunch of photographs, and the film was chewed up by some agency that took him away and said, oh, for some reason your film didn't work. But there's actually a photograph of him holding up some of this stuff on the front page of the local newspaper. It's also one of the first sightings of a couple of guys that were on a boat to his left. He didn't have any association with them, but those guys reported a Men in Black on them in a few seconds. And he says it was so strange. These things show up, do their thing, and suddenly we've got these really peculiar looking guys in the black suits, trench coats, the black hats, and sunglasses walking up to him saying, you didn't see anything. Really strange, right? And there was also an Air Force pilot that claimed to have seen one up in that same region, I believe. He claimed to see some UFO. Now, again, my close buddy who's 81 years old today, he said that his father on his deathbed, I just mentioned this, I'm going to mention it again for case this is your first video. He said his father was a test pilot on his deathbed, pushed his daughter out the room by request and told his son, look, when I was flying back in the day, he goes, we used to have these 30-foot discs fly up next to our vehicle and get so close to our vehicle, we thought they were going to disturb the atmosphere to the point where we're going to crash. And he goes, I couldn't change directions quickly because I'm in a very special craft, right? So I've had this stuff validated through channels like that makes me believe that it's either an organic being that we just don't know and we think they're made of metal, but they're not, or it is indeed some other civilization either hiding on the bottom of the ocean or coming from some other place, or potentially the third choice is some interdimensional thing. Now, one of the interesting things that I believe Eric Davis, the astrophysicist, did a calculation on is he said that when they try to figure out how much power it would take for one of these vehicles to create one of those fields around the outside. Now, again, this is just a calculation. We didn't see the formula. It could be completely wrong. But he said that it would take, at any 1 second of travel, the entire power grid of the United States of America dumped into this vehicle. Now, that sounds outrageous and amazing, but it's like, well, once you have 0-point energy, there was a guy named Sparky. You might want to look him up. He was an old man that created a little tiny box. It's about, I think about 6 inches by 4 inches by 2 inches. And that little box would draw a milliamp out of the ether of the universe. You could hook it to a circuit, and whatever other devices you would put in series with the circuit, it would simply suck out of the box however much power you needed, up to, I think, 240,000 watts. The dude files a patent. A guy comes, this happened to a very good friend of mine, same exact scenario. He created a hydrogen egg. The Sparky guy, he said a dude came up to him and showed him a photograph of him and his wife through the window of his house, started threatening him. This guy's just a little bumpkin dude, right? And he said, you got to stop your research. Well, he didn't. And he filed a patent. Actually, he filed a patent, and this stuff starts happening to him. He wouldn't get rid of it. He eventually gets murdered by whoever. He has a heart attack. It's the most, the ice gun and all that kind of stuff. It's put a venom in him, and just like a thing that happened a few years ago, stops your heart and you die. So he dies of a heart attack. And the way the story concludes is that 3 black vans show up to his house and illegally enter his house and steal everything he did, all the inventions, all the hardware, all the documentation. And of course, his wife had no idea what the heck he was doing. So it's over, right? You don't do it to a guy that's full of it, right? A friend of mine, I said that, so you guys would be like, tell us a story about your friend. A friend of mine created a design that would take sound inside of an egg-shaped piece of metal, and you play the sound of hydrogen through a sound wire in it, and something about the shape of the egg created an accelerated curve where you could actually manifest whatever signal you put into it. You could get the fundamental elements of the universe inside this thing. Of course, obviously, uranium would take a tremendous amount of power, but hydrogen, being the simplest particle in the universe, would take the least amount of energy. He starts documenting it, starts having discussions online. Someone catches on. This dude in a white Mercedes shows up, called himself Simon, did the same routine. He comes home, the dude's sitting in his backyard, and he's like, I got your whole life right here. I know when you brush your teeth. I know when you get up in the morning, you need to stop this research. And my buddy's like, hey, man, I'm not really doing research. I'm just kind of messing around. Well, you better stop, right? So my buddy really did kind of stop what he was doing. He did try to raise some money a couple of years later, but Homeland Security seized the cash in mid-flow. Really interesting. But these are 3 of my high school friends. One of them was dating the other one. The other one's a buddy. And very credible people. And they said that Simon dude kept showing up in his white Mercedes, chasing him around, putting notes on his windshield, and the note would disappear. But my other friends saw this happen, so they're like, this is a really strange situation. And he kind of read the tea leaves and said, look, I don't want to die, so it's not that important to me. I don't know if the thing would have worked, but I think Sparky's thing, he was showing videos of it working, and he paid the ultimate price for it. Never try to patent one of those inventions. You put that out there on the internet, exactly how you do it, the second you could do it. Go see Stan Meyer's episode on this channel, and you'll find a guy that was trying to make a ton of money instead of just releasing it to the world. Now, in terms of the economic impact, because this is one of the big things the mockumentary gets into, that when they go behind closed doors, there's a big economic impact to the world. Well, the only way that occurs, in my kind of shady tree observations of this whole thing, my layman's view, would be if that technology was actually just given to the public. Like I've covered in many, many episodes, you can't just release zero-point energy to the world. You can't. It's very dangerous, because if your enemies get a hold of it, they'll always turn it into a weapon, right? They'll at least threaten you with it. And then what are you going to do? Oh, we're going to threaten them. They're going to threaten us. Well, our threat's bigger than yours, right? You don't want that. The other big problem we have with energy, and you can just go look this up. 1930, the Standard Oil Company starts, right? The Rothschilds. And they provided oil. Now, of course, no one's a big fan of oil, and I'm not defending oil as a use or as a source of energy, but it just happens to be the way the world works, as they said in Landman. But you take the curve of energy availability to mankind from 1830 and bring it up to 2025, and then take world population curve from 1830, bring it up to 2025, and overlay them on top of each other. And you'll find they're pretty congruent with each other. Availability of energy, although wonderful, of course, right? We got AC motors eventually in the 20th century. So, but the evaluation for just simply acknowledging that aliens exist somehow affecting Amazon's bottom line, I don't buy it for a split second. They never mention in this mockumentary one time, even though they mention it several times because they want the oogie boogie formula to come back at you, to push back on the idea, we can't tell you about this. That's going to make you want it, right? But they don't talk about the actual mechanics of how this would ever occur. And it's just like all of these fake, phony, baloney narratives that just simply pose something to you, like Elon Musk coming out and saying, I've seen AI and it's going to destroy the entire world. And you're like, okay, dude, not that we don't believe you, but the next thing out of your mouth should be what you saw, or at least the archetype or the formula that suggests that what you're saying is actually true. And of course, because it's a narrative, the question's never asked. They just want that on a little TikTok video so you can repeat it to someone else. And the amount of times after he said that I had people calling me, talking to me, and they didn't have any interest in the elaboration at all either. And you're like, how's that even possible? You're telling me that I'm supposed to be fearful of something Elon Musk said, but you're not even curious about what that even means. You want me to make it up, right? There's no obligation to the guy that said it. Your random buddy has got to make up some excuse as to why that's going to be a problem. Now, what was really interesting was I went and I haven't seen the entire Joe Rogan interview, but I've seen, several 15-minute clips of it. I don't know how much of the whole interview I've actually seen, but this Dan Farah guy talked about, and I don't know if he said it was off camera. It sounded like he was talking about what was actually in the mockumentary, where he said that some guy had an encounter with a female alien that was dying. And he said this gave him a very verklempt moment. And he said, oh, it just hit me, man. When you see that part, you're going to really get touched. And it wasn't in the mockumentary. But what he said was, whoever was handling this female alien, as she was dying, her beaming consciousness to his was, you humans don't know your true potential. And it's like, okay, lady, if you got another second of life, how about a category? Maybe, what is it? We can run the quarter mile a little faster. What is it? What is the metric? Give me one metric. Is it we're more spiritual? Are we like you in some manner? Were you ever in this stage before, Mr. Klingon, Mr. Vulcan, Mr. whatever, so that we can get to your level? Like, if you really want to improve us, how about spill the beans a little bit, right? And stop spilling it to a bunch of folks that are going to hide it. That's one of the things I have a little bit of a reservation about, where Joe Rogan's interviewed all these guys that just recently came out of the woodworks like it's an agenda or something. Oh, I saw an alien craft land in the desert. And one guy said, oh, this sort of very human looking guy, except he had big round eyes, not almond eyes, but giant eyes in his sockets, ran up to the car and wanted help with his vehicle. And he wanted this particular type of, I think, metal or chemical or something, and the guy didn't know what he was really talking about. So he's like, maybe you should go back to the base over there. And the guy got angry at him because he's like, those are my enemies and all this other stuff. If these beings seem to travel autonomously, right? What I mean by that is they don't seem to represent the Starfleet Federation, right? They don't represent some global organization. Anytime you hear about their contact with you, they're just kind of dudes flying around like, what is it? The teasers who hang out with the Vogons and Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's all just kind of, the Vogons are kind of connected to a government, but the teasers were these little guys that ran around teasing people out in the middle of the wilderness, putting antennas on their head and making meep meep noises as the comedy goes. Why hasn't anybody just sat down with someone and said, okay, this is what we're all about. This is kind of how you're messing with it. Now remember, The Day the Earth Stood Still had a narrative in the movie, 1951, that because we were using nuclear weapons, that we were now threatening not only ourselves, but obviously we're now toying with weapons that could potentially threaten the aliens out there in the galaxy. So under the national security thing, the way that they've interpreted all of these sightings, and according to this Elizondo guy, one of the interesting things he kept saying, which was never elaborated on, again, once you hear the proposal without any elaboration, you're looking at a narrative. You're not looking at information. It's certainly not a documentary where, again, whoever's directing it, Dan Farah, would say, okay, I have an obligation to ask you the next question, because what Elizondo said was that the sighting counts are going astronomically up as of, say, 2004, when we first see our 40-foot Tic Tac, right? There's naval folks, and again, I will definitely say that I'm 2 degrees away from an individual. I'm no longer connected to the first-degree person, but I did a really long interview with this first-degree person who said, okay, I got a friend who served in Guam, and that you just see these UAPs all the time out there. Like, that's where they're being tested, right? And again, Dr. Stephen Greer interviewed a deck ape that was in the Navy, and he went out to help retrieve a ship that was caught by a fisherman. And it was this 30-foot disc, and it was a buoy repair ship. So it was accustomed to grabbing things out of the water, putting it on the deck and cleaning it off, putting it back in the ocean. So they end up sequestering this ship. They marched it out. They had a bunch of guys downstairs, which I don't know why they brought them. If the story's true, they blacked out all the windows. You got special ops guys that are jumping in the water, trying to wrap this vehicle in the sort of rope, the ladder rope that comes on a big spoil. And they were just using a spool. They put it in there, wrapped it around, dragged it on. He said he touched it, and it made the ship lean to a point where he was estimating it was 2 times the weight of a normal buoy. He says very thick, kind of a purplish black metal. And he goes back to shore at Guam, and he says the admiral told the gentlemen that were on the boat, the 6 that were allowed to be above deck and see this thing, you're to come to my office at 0800, and we're going to give you a debriefing, including your COs. And so he goes to the debriefing, and the admiral basically showed him a picture of this thing and said, look, this is a naval craft, and it splashed into the ocean, and you just happened to pick it back up. There's a lot of that narrative I completely believe. I think that, again, all of these vehicles that fly over water exclusively, hey, they're being tested. Why are they different shapes? Well, why not? And why not test a bunch of different shapes to see which one performs better? Perhaps as the technology advances, there's different things they can test about the propulsion systems and what have you, right? Oh, I should say that when they talked about the Russians picking up the Tic Tac, that was, I think they said 2 times bigger, could be bigger. That'd be 80 feet, gigantic, right? That there was a directed energy weapon inside the vehicle. Okay. So let's just say we divide this whole thing in half. And let's just give the UFO designation to real non-human aircraft. And we give UAP designations to human-created, back-engineered aircraft. Or even, we got some smart people that can create things. If an old guy, Sparky, can create a zero-point energy system in his garage and get killed for it, you didn't have any back-engineered back engineering of alien technology. He just simply figured it out, as a lot of these Midwestern guys do with like 8th grade educations, right? Keep it simple, stupid, right? And you'll find a bunch of miracles in reality. So what do they say about most sort of psyops that are going on in the world? They say 80% truth, 20% BS, right? I would say this particular documentary, Age of Disclosure, is about 80% BS and 20% truth. And I think that's where we are as a society. We are so tired and so bored because we just blow out all the dopamine in our brain all day long. For any of you who've taken acid in your lifetime, it so taxes your mind when you get done with it that for a couple of days, probably about a week after you take a decent trip, you're really mellow, because it's a very cool mellow. It's not like marijuana mellow where you don't even want to go to work and do anything. It's not like that. You feel very refreshed and you feel very still one with the universe kind of thing. But you can't abuse that stuff because your body cancels it out. So the more you take it, your body just cancels the whole thing out. Unfortunately, with mobile devices, all the little games, all the little videos, all the little shorts, this stuff is coming at you like crazy. One of the things the Chase Hughes guy said on the Shawn Ryan show was that he said one of the formulas, and I told you this back in my trauma journalism episode on season 1, which is on a different channel in YouTube, and it may actually be nailed from YouTube, not sure, BitChute has it, but just go to the website because I linked to the one that's still alive. If you ever find a dead video, please comment in YouTube and let me know which one I got to fix. I think I got them all up there. But I said to you, one of the big things is to put you in fight or flight mode by showing you a bunch of horrific stuff. And then the next thing they show you, after you're all juiced up, they need 4 or 5 little articles. That's why the news is always full of horrific articles. And then suddenly it's like, this is real when it's not. Is that you'll take that last thing and you'll put it in your brain in long-term memory so that when you recall it, it feels true. And what the Chase Hughes guy said was exactly the same thing. He goes, look, what they'll do is they'll show you a bunch of horrific stuff. Then they give you a puppy dog video where you actually shed a tear. And the next thing you see is an ad trying to sell you something. Now, what Chase does to cover his butt a little bit with, talking about stuff he's not supposed to talk about is he kind of backs off a few topics. He gets really to the beef. I wouldn't send you over there if it wasn't like that. But he basically says that he thinks the whole world's run by ads. It's all a monetary cause, but then he slips in a few things where he doesn't really believe that. So just kind of read between the lines. He's got to protect himself. He is definitely signed up. I think he probably still has a decent security clearance. But I don't get a big narrative from that guy. And if you listen to the way Shawn interviews someone, he really gets out of the way of the interview and gets to the meat of it. If you go see the interview he did with DJ Shipley, it's a whole different subject matter, but boy, you're going to see the prices our soldiers pay for what they do out there. But if you have a bunch of real sightings, potentially Truman, what was it, a few weeks later after Roswell incident occurs, he basically takes the OSI and makes it the other alphabet agency. And he also forms the Air Force right around that time frame because we needed to have something up in the air. It was very formal, which I believe was under the Army up to that point. I actually was told it was under the Navy by a buddy of mine who wrote a movie on it, so I'm not quite sure which one is real, but ChatGPT tells me it's Army, that all the planes were Army before then. But if you have a bunch of UFOs that are real, that people have seen, that no Air Force has ever been able to catch them, and they don't seem to exhibit sort of the newer form factors that we see today, like the Tic Tac and the gimbal, then that kind of provides a foundation, a bedrock to add stuff to it, right? Imagine we had, for some reason, a bunch of really heavy meteorite storms. It just happened because there's just a bunch coming towards us, and they're much brighter than the normal ones where you're kind of searching in the middle of the night to see if you find one. These are big and bright and furry, just like tinsel flying across the sky, right? Well, if that happened, someone could come up. You've seen it happen all the time online, all the fake conspiracies where they take something that's potentially has a little bit of meat on the bones, i.e. truth, and they spin it to the point you believe the world is shaped like a tetrahedron, right? I mean, it's just, they take it and spin it. And every time you start proving them wrong, Well, they just get super aggressive because you're messing with their dollars and cents, i.e. their ad revenue, for leading you down a bad path. A lot of the Telegram ones that are leading down bad paths will be like, oh, and you should buy this digital currency as well, you know. But so they now start getting ahead of the curve. Again, my buddy Sid Mead, he did some work for the Air Force for some pretty top secret vehicles at the time, which we now know exist. And they used to come back to his house and tell him all the time where they were with technology. They told him in around 2005 that 1996 was the crescent year where anti-gravity was completely figured out by the United States Skunk Works projects, and that they didn't have to use any moving parts, that it was actually all solid state systems. Okay, well, I don't know if they're blowing smoke up his pipe, but they, Sid was a very cool guy. He would just be like, oh my God, I have to call people. He would just go, oh, that's cool, So it doesn't get a rise out of him. They didn't get a rise out of him, I'm sure. And he just told me matter-of-factly one day, as we're talking about this kind of technology, we'll say that's true. All right, well then the Tic Tac could be our technology. And it's funny, I told you in one of my episodes that the scariest thing about the Tic Tac, if we have that technology, it's 40 feet, okay, supposedly. No one really knows, right? They always give us these horrible videos. And one of the things the scientists said, this Howard and Eric guy, they said, we've seen the crystal clear videos of the Tic Tac and the gimbal and other vehicles that you're not allowed to see. And he goes, that should just be released so people could see it. And I have put on the video one clear picture of the Tic Tac, and I wasn't sure if it was CG. They said in this mockumentary, those two scientists said one photograph was leaked out, and maybe that's the one we saw. I still think it's one of our aircraft, one of our vehicles of some sort. But I told you that the scariest thing about the Tic Tac is you can put a bomb in it, and you could drive it straight into any major city instantaneously, right? Because you're going to go 40,000 miles an hour without breaking the sound barrier. It just shows up in whatever enemy city you feel compelled to hurt, and you can blow it up. And thank God we don't have absolutely crazy human beings running our world, because I think that would have happened a long time ago. But they talked about that. They said, imagine taking this, one of these vehicles and you push it into a major city and you blow it up. They gave the full scenarios. Like, maybe some of these guys watch the show. I don't know. But one of the exercises I like to do in the show is to basically say, what if it was your job? What if it was our job to come up with this whole thing and figure out how to make people believe a certain thing that we want them to make them to believe? And again, the Chase Hughes guy goes into the science of this whole thing. And man, he keeps it simple and amazing. He said basically, he gives an example in that episode with Shawn Ryan that within a minute and a half, he goes, I will know all your weaknesses and all your strengths, and I will play to your weaknesses to manipulate you out of your envelope. And he goes, in 2 days, I can make you absolutely believe you have two personalities, and I can make you talk to yourself. And he gives the example, and you'll listen to it, and you'll be like, oh my God, thank God no one's ever done that to me. Because the way he does it, it's super simple. And if you think you have something wrong mentally with yourself, you're absolutely right for the picking on this. But if this was our job, we'd have to go, okay, what platform do we already have in existence that we can sort of jump off from? Well, we got UFOs. And we have a lot of people that have done research and they believe, look, I don't have all the answers, but when I did my Roswell episode, my constraint on myself was to listen to interviews from either first-degree people or second-degree people. And I was shocked how many first-degree people were in the equation, but even the second-degree people were just so compelling, where they're killing people in that town for running their mouth too much, being innocent. And, one lady was murdered with a wife and 2 kids. She ends up in a hotel registered to her sister or something, and she does the Marilyn Monroe death. Funny that they replayed that death for both Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Kilgallen, both linked to the same individual, as a matter of fact, for different reasons. One was sleeping with the individual, and the other one was trying to investigate why he got assassinated, and both these ladies get wiped out. But we would go to that foundation, wouldn't we? And then we would start to see, okay, what can we poach, and how much disinformation have we put out over the last 80 years on the subject matter? I guess probably about 80 years, right? And so you total up, well, which one of these little psyops, these little different disinformation psyops actually worked? How many of them believed it? So, okay, that one didn't work. This one got a lot of grip. There's still MUFON people that believe this one. That was all us, Bill Cooper came out of it, and he could see clearly because he was like, wow, I think a lot of what I saw was fake. And I see a lot of people believing that stuff that was inserted into your mind. I know it's not real. Or at least he had a pretty good inkling it wasn't real. Well, we'd write it all down on a piece of paper, wouldn't we? We'd have a little whiteboard in the conference room, or we're trying to dream this thing up. But here's what I want to sort of conclude with in your mind. If we had all that amazing information, right? I think the most effective thing you could possibly create in 2025 is age of disclosure. The exact content in that mockumentary is exactly what you need to hear to take you to the next level of absolute paranoia. I'm going to, our group, let's just say, is going to galvanize your belief that these are evil beings, even though they've done nothing wrong to us. Nothing. Even all the rumored encounters don't do anything to us. And the only little side caveat to that is that there are people that the Stanford guy looked at that said that the Dr. Nolan guy that had not only burning on the outside of their body, but burning on the inside of their body. Okay, what could that possibly be besides electromagnetic wave that's going to go right through your body? And how you would survive such a thing, that's sort of debatable. If they're pumping out what the Eric Davies guy said, Dr. Davis, then you're basically eating the entire, per second, okay, you're eating the entire wattage or megajoules or whatever of the entire electric grid of the United States of America in a nanosecond, in a picosecond. You're not going to survive that. So maybe really far away, it diminishes due to the entropy of the universe, and so you don't get so much of it. But the other idea was that you would start seeing light in your eyes because your rods and cones would start firing off. You'd be damn near blind in a split second because it's not going to recover. It would boil those little tiny, boil a lot of your capillaries. It would boil a lot of your vascular system, which is teeny tiny little veins and stuff, would just literally boil. And it's not coming back. It's going to be necrosed and eaten up by your body. And you're going to die. You're going to lose your limbs because you won't have any circulations to your phalanges, right? So not sure how these people are getting sick, but this is what I would do. I would create this documentary. Pay attention to the music. It's nauseatingly on point with what it's trying to do. It gets in the way of enjoying it. How many documentaries do you know that have musical scores that are literally like Elfman creating the score to Batman? I mean, it's like, it's not a documentary. This is an absolute emotional manipulation of your entire brain. Now, I made a mention of a few folks at the beginning of this episode that I hope that you have questionable integrity for. And I always find it interesting when people I don't trust at all, one who just shut down the government for a record number of days, hurting a lot of people in this world, when they appear to care about you all of a sudden, and they have perhaps the subject of UAPs on their tongue, it just adds a huge negative to the equation, right? Where you might have a positive impact from an equation or a negative impact from the equation. When these people we don't trust, and boy, at least two of them have major issues. I've heard audio depositions from one of them claiming he was involved in some of the worst stuff this government's ever done to people. When they care about you and they're inserting this thing, the way they're going to care about you is mitigating the UAP situation. It's like, no. Don't. You shouldn't be involved with the equation to begin with. And if anything is bankrolled or sort of fermented into existence as a result of these individuals, that whole thing is tainted and just needs to be struck out. Don't try to fix some super tainted thing, right? Just let it go and let's get some more reputable people to put together the plan to get information out. The big thing about the UAP Disclosure Act, which apparently they tried to pass, but it didn't get passed during Biden's administration. is that they want to harvest, and we've talked about this on the show several times, they want to harvest publicly, like Kennedy's speech in 1962 about going to the moon and all this other technology. They want to harvest the best of the best in the world to step up to the plate and participate in this reverse engineering. But on the flip side of the same exact narrative, they're saying we can't give this technology to anybody. Well, we know what's going on with Los Alamos Labs being sort of invaded by Chinese communists that steal information and go back to China and get, a whole life living on a hill made of gold. You can't just let everybody look at this technology if it truly existed. Because what if you mischaracterize a piece of technology? You thought it was a propulsion system, but it's like literally a death ray. Oh, we figured it out. And the guy that figures it out doesn't tell anybody he figures it out. In fact, he starts misdirecting all the other scientists, right? And so he goes back home to his home country, who might not be a friend of yours. Pop, you're gone, right? To save perhaps a dying economy, a dying population. There's all kinds of motives. And again, that's why when your country engages in certain activities that builds enemies in those countries, that'll all come back to bite you in the end. That's why we have to get rid of war and all this other stuff. So we see that sort of Gene Roddenberry perfect, I guess you could call it a socialistic world, but that's all fantasy, because in the Starfleet world of Earth, everyone seems to be at the same level of education. And the minimal level of education is probably the highest level of intellectual enlightenment that we have today in the 21st century. You should ask yourself why one of the chief objectives of any country is not to educate their citizens to the highest level, because they do not want the citizens to kind of organically figure out, wow, we're not really free. It was all an illusion, and let's make it free now. And that'll get rid of all the people in power and all the people living off of all of the pork belly spending, if you will, right? Anyway, I hope you dig the episode. Go see the mockumentary. It has its thing. You might see something different. I'm sure several of you will pay the $25 to see it. I'm sure it'll be free somewhere, and I'm sure it's been scraped off onto some illegal website where some of you might see it. I don't know. It has some interesting value. I thought the most entertaining thing for me was seeing someone spend money to animate what the gravity well system looks like when it flies through the air. One of the things the pilots were talking about was that they were complaining that we no longer use radar to track all the flights in the world. We actually use squawk boxes, which broadcast friend or foe, right? So you have an identity. If it's not, I don't think this is absolutely true. The military definitely still uses radars. But if you fly into enemy territory, you have a squawk box, you're going to get found by radar, not by the squawk box. So they said that one of the things that the military had done was they actually advanced up their radar system from, I think, something 73 to a 79. And when they did that, it provided a lot more data about what they were seeing. And they actually show some they show some footage. Who knows if it's real? It's all that gargled black and white crap. But it showed a field around some of the things that they were seeing, and basically indicating that's the gravity well technology around the vehicle. So I thought that was pretty cool. Even if it's not real, it's definitely what you would probably see if you could sense that kind of energy dispersion. They did talk about the fact that these things don't break the sound barrier, something we've covered on the show several times. They did talk about how they could fly through water, although there is apparently like 1,000% less mobility in water. One of the other things I'll just throw in at the end is that they have a Navy admiral, one-star Navy admiral, whose task was to map the oceans, to map the bottom of the oceans while he was in service. And this guy's pretty chill. He said that, and you've probably heard this statistic before, that I think we've only mapped something around 27% of the bottom of the ocean, leaving obviously a good 70% of it unmapped. And they suggested several times that if you were indeed an alien race and you wanted to conduct operations on Earth, that instead of being a mothership where you might be viewed, or being on the moon and flying in and getting viewed if you catch a little bit of light, that just putting a base on the bottom of the ocean would be the case. My stipulation with that is I don't buy the 27% at all. I think that it would be absolute imperative with submarine exercises. You just run exercises until you get the whole bottom of the ocean figured out. Why can't they hit that from space? You look at Google Earth and they've got the bottom of the ocean floor pretty mapped. That's a very macro view of the ocean. But what they're really talking about is all the anomalies. But of course, we know there's weird structures off the coast of almost every single country in the world when the oceans were much lower, when they were able to actually build Easter Island, coring those big head rocks, a big 300 feet down off the coast, which is where they find the quarries now. Japan has that crazy city with steps and all kinds of stuff carved into the stone, which geologists try to say that's completely normal. Okay, 11-inch step, which is like normal construction. Going up the hill, that's a natural formation, sure. So I think a lot of that's kept quiet because it will reveal the lie of rewritten history, which will be my next episode, but I don't mention those ocean things. But anyway, hope you dug it. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. That's where all the other alien episodes are. If you like if you're new to Deep Thoughts and you like alien encountering episodes, I got my own encounters that I've had. And I know it sounds strange. I'm not a guy that needs attention, but they're there. But we talk about how to build a UFO. We talk about what it would be like to actually meet an alien, slowing down time in your brain and going, what would you really do if you really just saw one walk out of a ship? We have lots of UAP episodes and different sightings, Roswell 2. So if you like that kind of content, it's all up there waiting for you. But anyway, up on the website, we've got audio, video, in case you want to listen to this in your car while you drive to work or on a long trip. We've got a store with some shirts. I'm missing one shirt, and it's the really shirt that shows the Apollo capsule. It says really with a question mark, the Apollo lander. So I need to get that back up there. I don't know how it fell off there. Again, all the shirts are in a lot of different colors. Even though the thumbnails are all black, you get them all kinds of different colors. So for those of you who are purchasing, thank you so much. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.